First of all, welcome to everyone who's tuning in live. It's my pleasure to be here today and talk to you about keeping pace with AI, managing speed, governance, and technical depth with Autonomous FeatureOps. Now, that's a lot of big words, and we're going to break it down through some practical demos and looking how this all works in practice. But before we get to that, I'm just going to say a very brief couple of words about myself. So, hello, my name is Fredrik. I work as a principal engineer in Unleash. I've been in Unleash for the last 5.5 years, and a lot has happened in that time. I like to say that I love to solve difficult problems, and I'm very lucky because Unleash has provided me with that opportunity at every step of those 5.5 years. So I'm very happy here. I also have two kids. They give me all sorts of different problems, but I love them to death. Um, and with that out of the way, we're not gonna spend a lot of time in slides here, but I wanna just talk a little bit about the backdrop because it's important for what we are going to be going through. And it is, of course, the AI transformation. The last 2 years have been extremely transformative, and it's rare. It's actually astonishing to see change happen this fast. And when you're working in product, you're always thinking about how can you get users to change their behavior, and you know that that is usually the hardest thing to do. And here we are in the span of 2 years. We've gone from a world where we mostly wrote everything by hand with code to a world where we are now using AI assistants to write a huge chunk of the code. And obviously, that also changes how we are interacting with the code, the ownership that we have to the code, and that also gives some worries and concerns as well that I'll get a little bit more into. Because when you go from a world where code generation can happen almost from a world where you wrote everything by hand to a world where code generation can happen instantaneously, you might get in the habit or the danger of outsourcing a lot of the small decisions that you previously did as a developer. And even though you can generate 10,000 lines of code in one go and have a working prototype of product, doesn't mean that you should. So in Unleash last fall, we sat down and we had a look at AI and kind of what was happening in the community around AI. And we saw basically two things or two movements that we could identify. And one was a bottom-up movement of developers experimenting, using the tools, sharing knowledge, sharing what worked, and trying to kind of find that perfect workflow of being able to create production-ready code with AI. And I would say that this movement was characterized a lot by excitement and optimism, and people were really enjoying using these new tools and trying to find whatever worked for them. And then on the other side of that, we also saw a top-down movement. And in this movement, we could see that managers were pushing AI onto developers who maybe at the time weren't very ready to start using it, had a lot of concerns with the quality of the models. And management, in fear of falling behind, pushing this onto the developers, created a lot of anxiety. And because you're now expected to use this tool, mandated maybe, that generates the code that you are responsible for. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, AI doesn't take the blame. A human takes that role. And if something breaks in production, it's not Claude or Codex that takes on that responsibility. It's me. I take on that responsibility. So I have to be very careful in how I use those tools, and I have to make sure that I have the tools available to me that allows me to experiment in a safe way. And then I just want to add on to that before we get into the demo that it's very interesting because we started this transformation before finishing the last transformation. And that is one where software engineering teams are still transitioning to DevOps, using feature flags and methods of kind of making the deployment of code easier. And now we're in a whole new transformation. So we need good tools to allow us to do this safely. And that's why I think that the fundamentals matter now more than ever. We want to be able to deliver production code fast and safe. And I think that feature flags has a central role in that. So with that backdrop, I want to jump right into the demo. And I'm going to walk you through what I have here. So we have a demo application here. It's a banking service. We have two users, John Carter and Margaret Race. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I have Unleash, which this application is wired up to. And there are a few feature flags here that I'm going to be using in a minute to display some use cases. So if we go into the application, it's a basic dashboard. You have activity, payments, savings up here, and it looks the same for both of our users. So having a look at the code as well, just very quickly, it's a basic React app and a area here. So one that I think that most engineers will be familiar with. And that is the one where you're finishing functionality, you're pushing it out, and then suddenly something starts to go wrong in production. And in this case, our online claims auto processing is enabled. And immediately I see that the logs start showing some failures. So looking at the failures here, I see that the payout multiplier is being applied to all 847 active claims, and beneficiaries are receiving 10x policy face value. And then we have duplicate disbursement detected. We're claiming funds twice to beneficiaries. And also all fraud scoring is bypassed. So this seems bad. Actually, it's very bad. It's a full-blown disaster at this point. And we have to get this out of production as soon as possible. Now, if you don't use feature flags, if you don't have runtime control, you are talking minutes to hours based on how fast your pipeline is. But if you're using dynamically controlled feature flags, we're talking seconds. So we can go ahead and turn this online claims processing off, and we can turn the maintenance banner on. So immediately you can see in my application that the online claims processing is temporarily unavailable. There's a banner up here. And we obviously apologize sincerely because we're good people. And if we go into our application, look at the logs, you can see that the online claims auto processing has been disabled. So we're able to mitigate this in seconds, not minutes or hours, or even days. Could you imagine if this was a real scenario and it was live, even for an hour for a bank? That would be a disaster. So, I mean, for developers, and just taking the business case out of it, which is obviously important, but just as a developer, having this capability makes me feel so much more confident in everything I'm putting out, because I know that I can always fall back to just turning it off. Okay, we have to figure out what's going wrong. Okay, we turn it off. We investigate on Monday, and then we go back home and sleep. And I haven't slept this good since I joined Unleash, like 5.5 years of good sleep, minus the last 3, but that's the kids' fault, not Unleash. So going back to our demo, feature flags can be used as a kill switch, but that's not all. We also have the ability to control who gets access to what. And the way we do that is with something we call targeting and constraints. So in this application, I have a new dashboard functionality that I have developed. And I want to make sure that I can turn this on only for John Carter, because I know that younger people are a bit more accepting for change. And I want to test the waters a little bit before I roll this functionality out to a wider audience. So looking at the new dashboard feature flag, I can go into it and I can show you the strategy. And here we have a constraint that says that age is a number less than or equal to 35. And we want to roll out to 100% of our base that matches that. So if I turn this on now, and I'll show you in the code as well, this part is where we update the context when the application starts. And here is where we're passing in the age. So this is in the Unleash SDK, taking the data you send in, taking the strategy configuration, and merging the two to make a decision on whether this is on or off. So if I go into Margaret Brace now, you see she still has the old dashboard from before. But if we go into John Carter, you see he has an altogether different dashboard now with the retirement goal, this month's premiums and withdrawals, and this recent activity section here at the bottom. So that's how you can use targeting to kind of determine who gets access to what. But let's take that concept and push it a little bit further, because as developers, we always want to de-risk the changes that we are making. So that's the goal, and that's what Unleash also can help you do. So looking at the code for this application, in the transaction section, we have a transfer endpoint. So basically, it just takes a from account, a to account, and an amount. And then we run it through this transaction processor to get a result, and we reply with some JSON. Now, let's say that we wanted to change how this core logic handling transactions work. Now, that's a very risky change, and it's going to have a huge blast radius unless we can de-risk it. So let's have a look at how we can do that. So I'm going to first create a new transaction processor here. And the way we'll differentiate this is we'll just call this V2 so we can check which response we are getting back. And then I've prepared a little bit, so let me uncomment this and take you through what this code does. So this here is calling Unleash, it's enabled. It's calling this feature flag, the new transaction processor. And then we're passing in the amount, which is the context that we need to be able to de-risk this. And then based on the outcome of this, we're either calling the new transaction processor or the old one. So if we go back to our Unleash dashboard, we'll go into the new transaction processor here, and we will go ahead and enable this. And the important part here is this constraint. So we are constraining this to transactions where the amount is a number that is less than or equal to 10. Meaning that we are only targeting transactions that are very, very small in size. So we can have a look at how this works. Let me get a couple of curl commands. We'll start by, actually, we changed an endpoint, so we need to do this. And then let's check this out. So if we do a curl command where the amount is 1000, we expect to get V1. Now, if we change this to do a curl command where the amount is 10, we expect to get V2, and we do. So we've successfully de-risked this to only target very small transactions. And you can imagine that this is an example where I'm using the amount of a transaction, but this is really generalizable to any data that you have in your domain. And any way you want to kind of de-risk this could be, I don't know, maybe you have a segment, a customer segment that's like free tire or a tire before your paid plan or something like that. Maybe you only want to target users that has a specific property. It can be anything that you have in your domain you can use to kind of target and constrain. Okay, so we've been through the kill switch. We've been through the targeting. Now we're going to move into a little bit more complicated scenarios. So I'm going to get back to Unleash. And we're going to start talking about release plans. And Release plans are basically reusable segments of strategy. So if you have a specific way that you want to roll out your features, you can use release plans to make a set of strategies that are repeatable across your features. So I'll show you how that works now. So I'll add this pro release plan to my feature flag. And then you can see we have a release plan here. Now this one has 5 steps, and you can see they are grouped in milestones, which are containers for strategies. And we start at 10%, go to 25, then 50, 75, and 100. So let me go ahead and start this now. And you can see the first milestone start running. So this will be on for 10% of our pro users. Now we can also add automations. So we can say that we want to proceed to the next milestone 5 hours after milestone start. And we can do this between multiple steps. And that will save me from going into Unleash and having to manually change how this works, or flipping the flag, changing the strategy, and this will happen automatically. The danger of that is, of course, that if something wrong happens, I don't want the automation to run. That's why we also have the concept of impact metrics and safeguards. Now, impact metrics are basically Prometheus metrics that you can ingest into Unleash in 2 ways. And I'll come back to those 2 ways. One is through the SDK, and the other is through your own OpenTelemetry provider. So you can use those metrics to basically stop a release in its tracks. So if I add a safeguard here, I can choose between disabled environment and post-release plan automation. So if I disable the environment, I can choose new transaction processor error rate, and I can say that if it's above 10 in the last 15 minutes, I just want to disable this environment. It's currently on. So if I save this, I have this safeguard that is looking constantly at this metric and making a decision. Should I turn this on or should I leave it off? I have this application here in the background. It's just constantly now calling Unleash with this impact metric. On the Unleash SDK, you have an impact metric object. And you can see here on line 23, I'm defining the counter, new transaction processor error rate. And then in this loop, I just do increment counter. So this is constantly just incrementing it and sending it to Unleash. And typically what I would do is I would have this counter in the code path of the feature I'm working on, or a feature that I'm improving, and have like a specific metric for that, so I can track that one-to-one with the feature, because I don't want the feature to be turned off due to an adjacent error in the system. I want to be able to tie those together one-to-one. So you can see here now that the environment turned off and the safeguard triggered. So that kind of allowed us to use the safeguard to disable the environment automatically, looking at this metric that we just described. And you can also use your own OpenTelemetry metrics, as I mentioned. If you do that, you can go to the admin settings here. There's a impact metrics section here in the UI that you can go to, and you can configure the URL to your internal Prometheus instance, and then you have those metrics available to you in Unleash. Good. Now switching gears a little bit, the last thing I want to talk about is the MCP that we have. So, and here's where the demo gods has to be a little bit with me. I hope they are. But we haven't developed an MCP that you can use to interface with Unleash. And the method of doing that is you can either install it locally on your machine, or if you have an Unleash instance and you're a customer, you can use a command to kind of add the MCP remotely and then piggyback on your OAuth to unleash to authenticate against this MCP. And the way you do that is just call MCP add unleash, you provide the URL and the transport. Now I've already done this, so I have the MCP available here. And this is my coding agent. I'm using Claude Code. If you're using Codex, the setup is very similar. And here you can see the MCP, and you can go ahead and see the tools as well. You have create flag, evaluate, change, detect flag, cleanup, set flag rollout. A few more tools that I won't get too much into detail on, but you can dive in on your own if you're interested. So I've already gone ahead and asked it to create a feature flag and protect some functionality that I had already prepared in this branch. So what I asked it to do, just going up here. This formatting is a little bit off, but essentially I asked it to create a flag around the investments page and then feature flag protected. And what we've instructed the MCP to do is to basically build some of the logic smarts that we have in Unleash or the domain context that we have into the MCP. So when it's wrapping your flag, we try to instruct it to keep it runtime controllable. So for example, don't add a flag around the router definition, because if you do that, then you have to restart your server for it to take effect. The flip won't work. So we're trying to build that into the MCP as well. Now, if we go back to the project that I have, you can see we have this feature flag. It was created by the MCP. So now I'm going to tell it to turn it on. So turn on the feature flag in the development environment. Just using Super Whisper to save some time. And then we'll be able to see what it's doing. It's getting the toggle tool from the MCP and then turning it on. So it's going to set a 100% rollout strategy and enable it in the development environment. So you can see now this flag flipped to on, and we have the 100% rollout. So let me just start the server again. And here we have the investments page. So this is now feature flag protected. It now disappears. And the last thing we can do is we can ask it to clean up the feature flag, remove the flag from the code, but keep the functionality. And it will proceed to call the cleanup tool in our MCP. It will remove the flag from the code. It will flag to you that you should archive and this feature flag in Unleash. And that is all I had. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. So let me go back here. And let's see the Q&A section. Does updating flags in production go through approval?
Hey, Fredrik. Sorry to jump on. By the way, we have still time. The next section is in 13 minutes. So if you have anything else to show, feel free to show it. But I also wanted to jump on this question that this gentleman asked some time ago, 6 minutes ago. Would you like to take that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, great question. I think that is configurable for you. We have this process or flow called change request, which you can turn on for any environment. So I can actually show you right now. If you go to the project section and to settings, you will have this change request configuration here. And I can go ahead and turn that on for production. And
do you mind zooming in a little bit, Fredrik? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So now this is on for production. And if I go back and try to make any change to a production environment, for example, let's say I want to add a gradual rollout and set it to 100%. Now I'm not allowed to immediately apply this change. It has to go through a change request. So it's gonna create a draft, which I can then submit. And then someone has to go in and actually approve this change request before it gets applied in production. So that's how that works.
Cool, thank you. We have another question in the chat. Let me see if I can, show it on stage. Can you read it, Fredrik?
Yeah. So any concerns around scalability, possible millions of pings to Unleash server every time the code fires? Yes, that is a core design of Unleash, that the evaluations of the strategies that execute in your code path, they actually happen locally to in your application. So what Unleash will do is it will reach out to Unleash on a polling interval every 15 seconds, every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds, based on how important it is to you to get those changes that you want to get, the changes you make to your strategies. And then Unleash will pull those down. And when your run is enabled, that is looking up a cached data set. And with the context that you provide, that is basically being run and executed in your code. So Unleash, when you call this enabled in the code path, it already has all the data it needs to make that decision on whether the flag is on or off. It doesn't need to go out to Unleash and get the configuration. And we also have a product called Unleash Edge that handles the scaling of, even if you have an order of magnitude of clients, if that needs to poll, or you have a front-end client that has a lot of traffic. We have a product called Unleash Edge that vertically scales and kind of solves those extreme use cases as well.